to the Girl in the Tiara blog. This post is titled 5 Types of Kokoshnik Tiaras. In a previous post, I talked about Grand Duchess Hilda of Baden's stolen tiara. That tiara is a kokoshnik, so I thought I'd explain what that means and describe a few examples. First of all, what's a kokoshnik? The kokoshnik is a traditional Russian headdress. It's shaped like a halo, which means it's widest above the forehead and a little narrower at the sides. If you've ever seen the golden halos of saints in Russian icons or other Christian art, you get the general idea. If you visit the original blog post, you'll see a Russian icon of Our Lady of Kazan from the 19th century, where the lady has a circular golden halo around her head. The earliest versions of kokoshniks were covered with fabric and tied on with ribbons at the side. Also in the original post, you'll see a painting of a Russian peasant girl wearing a kokoshnik in textured fabric with fringe along its bottom edge tied on with pink ribbons. That painting is by Viktor Kuznetsov. He was famous for his romanticized depictions of Russian history and folklore, including a super famous painting of Ivan the Terrible you'd probably recognize if you saw it. You know the one, where he's all side-eyeing you all creepy-like, wearing a fur hat and a gold brocade tunic, and holding a staff with a pointy end, like he's about to stab a bitch. But let's not get sidetracked. The kokoshnik was part of traditional Russian folk dress, along with the sarafan, which is a sort of jumper or pinafore with a blouse underneath. The kokoshnik made it to the Russian royal court in the 16th century, where boyars' wives wore fancy versions studded with gems and covered with rich golden cloth. Catherine the Great had one, and her adorable granddaughter Alexandra Pavlovna was painted in one while wearing her sarafan. I highly recommend you visit the post to see this painting. She's the cutest little girl, like, ever, wearing pearl earrings, a double strand of pearls around her neck, and an enormous beaded kokoshnik with a lacy cap underneath. Kokoshniks really caught on in the mid to late 19th century after jewelers adopted this traditional shape to make tiaras for the Russian imperial family. These ultra-luxe kokoshniks were actually a clever piece of marketing. You see, the Russian royal family was, in terms of bloodline, way more German than Russian. By reusing a design from folk tradition, it's like the Russian royals were saying, "Hey you, peasant, we wear kokoshniks too. See? This means we all have a shared cultural history. We're the same person, really. So think about that before you plan another bombing or revolt. You wouldn't want to hurt you, would you?" Kokoshnik tiaras became a part of Russian court dress, which meant every royal lady had one. In the post, you can see a picture of Grand Duchess Alexandra Georgievna in Russian court dress in about 1890. She's adapted a fringe tiara to fit around the front of her fabric kokoshnik. Of the 14 tiaras in the Russian royal collection, 4 were kokoshniks, according to Geoffrey Munn's book on tiaras. Soon, other European royals saw their Russian counterparts look and fly in their kokoshniks and decided they wanted in on that action too. The trend hit maximum velocity in 1889 when Princess Alexandra of Wales specifically requested a kokoshnik tiara that looked like her sister Minnie's. And by Minnie, I mean Empress Maria Feodorovna of Russia. But we'll talk about Alexandra's tiara in a little bit. Today, you'll find kokoshnik tiaras in the collections of Great Britain, Sweden, and Luxembourg, among others. But thanks to the ingenuity of designers like Cartier, Boleyn, and Schmidt-Staub, the simple kokoshnik can look very different. So without further ado, here are 5 kokoshnik tiaras and the amazing women who wore them. Tiara number 1 belonged to Grand Duchess Hilda of Baden. This one's an example of a kokoshnik tiara with a traditionally shaped frame, flat on the bottom and curved across the top. The space in the middle is empty, and there are stylized decorative motifs connecting the top and bottom of the frame. It was created in 1907 or 1908 by the Baden court jeweler, Hermann Schmidt-Staub. It belonged to Grand Duchess Hilda, and it was probably commissioned when her husband inherited the title of Grand Duke. The base has 3 rows of diamonds, one with rectangular diamonds, one with diamonds in a laurel wreath motif, and one with diamonds in intricate scrollwork. The arched top frame anchors a series of symmetrically draped garlands with diamond drops hanging between each of them. It contains 367 diamonds set in platinum and yellow gold. Its first owner, as I mentioned, was Grand Duchess Hilda of Baden. She was born a Princess of Nassau, But that title only lasted 2 years, since her dad lost his dukedom in the Austro-Prussian War. Luckily, he was filthy rich before his settlement with the Prussians, so Hilda was still a catch on the marriage market. In 1885, she married Friedrich, the hereditary Grand Duke of Baden, the heir to the duchy. They had no children, which bothered Hilda, and really bothered her mother-in-law. In 1907, her father-in-law died, and Friedrich, nicknamed Fritz, became the new Grand Duke. But their tenure only lasted a little more than a decade. She and Fritz lost their throne in the German Revolution of 1918. But Hilda kept this tiara and wore it to a bunch of the family events she attended during the long years of exile, including King Gustav of Sweden's 80th birthday party in 1938. When Hilda died in 1952, she left this tiara to her niece, born Princess Antonia of Luxembourg. Antonia had married Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria in 1921. Although the Bavarian royal family, the Wittelsbachs, also lost their titles in the 1918 revolution, Ruprecht remained a political force thanks to the deep loyalty of the Bavarian army. If there were ever going to be a restoration, some thought Ruprecht would win out over a Hohenzollern thanks to his experience in the army. But Ruprecht had no intention of declaring himself the new Kaiser. He wanted the people to do it for him. Like Cheap Trick, he wanted them to want him. In the meantime, he and Antonia maintained a royal standard of living that included the Bavarian crown jewels. That is, until the Wittelsbach family sold some of the jewels in 1931, but that's a story for another post. As Hitler gained more and more power in the 1930s, Ruprecht and Antonia got nervous. They sent their kids to school in England so they wouldn't have to join the Hitler Youth. Ruprecht and Antonia also refused to fly Nazi flags from their Munich palace, which is awesome because it pissed Hitler off to no end. In 1944, a group of German nobles tried to assassinate Hitler. If you've ever seen the Tom Cruise movie Valkyrie, you already know the deal. Hitler's paranoia kicked into high gear. He thought Ruprecht and Antonia were part of that conspiracy, but they totally weren't. He put out the order to arrest them in Italy, where they'd fled to avoid a situation exactly like this. Ruprecht evaded Hitler's goons, but poor Antonia and the kids were rounded up. She spent the war on the verge of death in a prison hospital. The kids were bounced between concentration camps until they were liberated in 1945. Antonia never returned to Germany and died in Switzerland in 1954. Antonia's daughter Edita inherited the Kokoshnik tiara. She lived in Italy with her husband, a man she'd met during their quasi-exile in the run-up to World War II. Once liberated from the concentration camp, she went back to Italy to find him and marry him. They had 3 daughters, one of whom she named Antonia after her mom. But her life had its share of tragedy too. She and her husband were in a serious car accident in 1954 on the eve of her youngest sister's wedding. She survived. Her husband didn't. The shock was enough to kill Antonia, who had never really recovered from the Nazi prison hospital. I can't imagine this tiara was much comfort to Edita, having lost her mother and the man she loved. Edita remarried 5 years later to another non-royal. At some point, she put this tiara up for sale. We know it was auctioned in 1973, but we don't know if it was Edita who sold it, or if it had already passed into someone else's hands. The tiara appeared at auction again in 1984 when the Baden State Museum bought it. That's where it stayed until 2017, when some total asshole stole it. This brings us to Kokoshnik tiara number 2, the Westminster Enamel tiara. This particular tiara looks a lot more like the original fabric versions. Solid and colorful, except this time, gleaming enamel replaces the fabric seen in the original versions. Joseph Chalmé created this tiara in 1911 using platinum, gold, enamel, and diamonds. The solid background is a blue pliqué à jour enamel with vertical diamond stripes that arch away from the center. Between the diamond stripes are tiny strands of diamond forget-me-nots. It contains a total of 280 brilliant cut diamonds mounted in platinum and gold. The second Duke of Westminster, Hugh Grosvenor, bought this tiara from Chalmé for £375. Diana Scarisbrick, who wrote the Christie's Lot essay when it came up for auction, describes it as, quote, combining Russian grandeur with Parisian elegance. Yeah, that sounds about right. The guy who bought it, the Duke of Westminster, gave it to his wife, Constance Edwina Cornwallis West, who was called Sheila. The reason? She needed something kick-ass to wear during the endless string of parties and balls celebrating George V's coronation in 1911. The Westminster's party was one of the most decadent. Crown Princess Marie of Romania reported seeing Gainsborough's famous The Blue Boy painting hanging on the wall. This is another famous painting you'd recognize if you saw it. It's a preteen boy dressed in elegant 17th century fashion, a pale blue jacket with lace collar and knee-length pants, with stockings and fancy shoes. He's holding a Three Musketeers hat with a white plume in it. He's looking straight at you, which is why you've probably seen a copy in a horror movie or a Scooby-Doo episode. If you cut out the eyes, a ghost or villain could totally spy on anyone in the room where that painting is hung. But let's get back to the Grosvenors. Sheila's father's family had a noble background. They were descended from the Earl Delaware, which is where our state name Delaware comes from. Growing up, she and her family lived near the Grosvenors. Sheila and the first Duke's grandson, nicknamed Bender, were childhood sweethearts. Her little sister, Daisy, conducted a mock wedding ceremony for them as kids, complete with the butler and housemaid as witnesses. For years afterward, Sheila and Bender called each other wife and husband. But as teenagers, their families refused to let them get married. So they waited until Bender's grandfather kicked the bucket, then they swapped rings in 1901. They went on to have 3 kids together, 2 girls and a boy. Little sis Daisy didn't do too badly either. She married a super-rich German prince and befriended Kaiser Wilhelm II. But all was not well in the Westminster marriage. Sheila liked being the center of attention, always playing the society hostess. Bender was more conservative and didn't like the expensive and frivolous lifestyle Sheila and Daisy were so well known for. Neither one, it seems, wanted to change or compromise. When Bender and Sheila's only son died in 1909, the marriage was basically over. 4 years later, in 1913, Hugh offered Sheila a yearly allowance if she'd agree to a separation. "Nope," she said, "I'm still good with the castles and the tiaras and our daughters, thanks." During World War I, they kept themselves busy. He fought, and she became a nurse. He actually worked on a prototype for an armored Rolls-Royce, which sounds pretty freaking cool. They finally divorced after the war, in June of 1919, but he kept the tiara. Later, Sheila remarried to a Royal Air Force officer. Bender shacked up with Coco Chanel for 10 years. He also married 3 more times, to Violet Mary Nelson, Loelia Mary Ponsonby, and Anne Winifred Sullivan. He never had a son, and his title passed to a cousin. When Bender died in 1953, the tax on his estate totaled a whopping £18 million, a Guinness World Record at the time. To make that payment, the new Duke's family had to sell some of the estate's artwork and jewels. This tiara may have been one of those sacrifices. We're not clear on when it was sold or who bought it, but it reappeared on the market in about 1995, mislabeled as a Fabergé tiara. But tiara expert Diana Scarisbrick matched it to a design in the Chaumet ledgers, proving its provenance. Weirdly enough, the buyer was, wait for it, another Duke of Westminster. The 6th Duke, Gerald Grosvenor, was a billionaire who personally owned an assload of London real estate in Belgravia and Mayfair. In 1978, he'd bought the Bagration tiara for his new wife, Natalia. The gift must have gone over like gangbusters, because this Enamel Kokoshnik tiara joined the family collection once more. But in this case, history really did repeat itself. Grosvenor put this enamel tiara up for auction 10 years later, in November of 2015. I'm not sure why, since the Sunday Times estimated his wealth 1 year later at about $13 billion, and yes, that's billion with a B. It's not like he needed the money, so maybe he was just really antsy to clean out the closet. Or maybe there's some unknown curse on this tiara that we just don't know about. The tiara sold for 677,000 Swiss francs to an anonymous buyer who was not me. Update: we know where it is now. This tiara is on display at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. At least it was as recently as summer of 2018. The museum has a permanent collection of Fabergé items from the McFerrin Fabergé collection, the largest private collection of Fabergé items in the world, with 600 plus items. Holy Mother of God, I need to get to Houston. So that anonymous buyer was apparently Arthur and Dorothy McFerrin. That brings us to Kokoshnik Tiara number 3, Queen Alexandra's Kokoshnik Tiara. I love this one because it's composed entirely of diamonds. Boom! How do you like them apples? It's literally a wall of diamonds. On your head. I can't even, you guys. This tiara consists of 61 platinum bars that hold a total of 488 diamonds. It first belonged to Alexandra, Princess of Wales. It was a gift for her 25th wedding anniversary, presented by a group of British noblewomen. Alexandra knew the gift was coming, though. She'd specifically requested the kokoshnik shape. The noblewomen carried her request straight to Gerard, who created this beauty. It's still one of my all-time favorites. Alexandra was a Danish princess, born into a relatively poor family for royalty. As kids, she and her sisters often sewed their own clothes. Later, when her father became King Christian IX of Denmark, they got a serious lifestyle upgrade, but none of them lost their unique ability to laugh, have fun, and play practical jokes on each other. I am not kidding about the practical jokes. If royalty had a family fit to star in Punk'd, this is it. From squirting each other with garden hoses, to turning cartwheels in corsets, to blowing cayenne pepper into the faces of ladies-in-waiting, this family did it all. In addition to a sense of humor, they also had a knack for landing on thrones. Take Alexandra's sister, for example. She became Empress Maria Feodorovna of Russia. Her amazing diamond kokoshnik inspired Alexandra's request for this tiara. Both Alex and Minnie had their fair share of heartbreak. Alex's major source of heartbreak was her husband Bertie, the future King Edward VII. Dude just couldn't keep it in his pants. He cheated on her with a dizzying array of aristocrats and actresses. That doesn't mean he didn't love her, and it doesn't mean she didn't love him. It's just a fact that tends to depress modern readers. He loved me most, Alex said later. Make of this what you will. But Alex had a lot more going for her that had nothing to do with her husband. She loved dancing, hunting, dogs, ice skating, and riding horses. She also loved painting and woodworking and photography. Woodworking? Yeah, that's right, I said woodworking. Also, thanks to a divisive conflict between her home country of Denmark and Prussia, she had strong feelings about the unification of Germany. She hated it. And the Kaiser. She hated him. In 1890, when Britain was about to trade their North Sea island of Heligoland for Germany's colony of Zanzibar, Alex wrote to her ministers and said, "Don't do it. Bad idea. Seriously, these guys are assholes." The ministers didn't listen, the exchange happened, and then Germany used Heligoland to fortify their navy and generally cause asshattery and mayhem during World War I. When Alexandra died in 1925, this tiara passed to her daughter-in-law, Queen Mary. When Mary died in 1953, she left it to her granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II. The present queen wears this tiara a lot, almost as much as I wear my double strand of imitation pearls. It was in especially heavy rotation in the 1960s. In 1961, for example, she wore it to the Vatican with a black veil to meet Pope John XXIII. If you check out the original post, you can see a couple pictures of her in this tiara, including one where Prince Philip has a cheeky little grin on his face as he stands next to his beautiful wife. That brings us to tiara number 4, Elizabeth Feodorovna's Emerald Kokoshnik. Like the Westminster enamel tiara, this kokoshnik has a solid center. It's filled in with stamped silverwork and set with gems. The frame is made of gold and silver, traced with geometric patterns. Set into the frame are diamonds and 7 domed emerald cabochons. Beneath the frame's geometric inserts are tiny lilies of the valley, a symbol of love and luck. Spoiler alert, they didn't work. The Russian court jeweler, Bolin, created it in 1884 for Grand Duchess Elizabeth Feodorovna of Russia. It was a wedding present from her husband, Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, in order to display the emeralds he'd inherited from his mom. Elizabeth, nicknamed Ella, was born a princess of Hesse and by Rhine. Her little sister, Alexandra, would grow up to marry Tsar Nicholas II and become the last Tsarina of Russia. But Ella was the first to marry into the Romanov clan. Fun fact, Since Sergei was Nicholas's uncle, that made Ella not only Alexandra's sister, but her aunt by marriage. You know what they say, incest is best. As a couple, Ella and Sergei were a strange match. Ella was warm, social, and artistic. Sergei was aloof and intense, deeply devoted to the Orthodox faith, and very well-read. Ella's grandma, Queen Victoria, had been hell-bent on preventing their marriage because she didn't trust Russia or Russians. "Don't do it," she said. "This is going to bite you in the ass." And in the long run, she was right. Ella and Sergei had no kids of their own, but they became foster parents to their orphaned niece and nephew. Their nephew, Dmitri, tended to give them higher parenting marks than their niece, Maria, who pretty much resented Ella for the rest of her life. Everything changed in 1905 when an anarchist assassinated Sergei by throwing a bomb at his carriage. The incident transformed Ella. She gave up her position in society, along with her beautiful clothes and jewels, and founded the Order of Saints Martha and Mary. For the rest of her life, Ella lived as a nun and worked to help the poor. In 1917, Russia convulsed in revolution. Ella thought the Bolsheviks would ignore her because she was a nun. She was wrong. In 1918, the Bolsheviks arrested her and took her to Alapayevsk with 7 friends and family members. They were all murdered on the night of July 16th, 17th. So what happened to the tiara? Well, in 1908, after Sergei's assassination, but before the revolution, Ella had given it to her niece and foster daughter, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna. It was a wedding present, celebrating Maria's marriage to Prince Wilhelm of Sweden. But like everything else in this story, that marriage went to hell in a handbasket, ending in divorce in 1914. Maria blamed Ella for forcing her into the marriage. But from Ella's point of view, she probably wanted to see Maria settled so she could devote herself to religious life. Maria brought the tiara back to Russia after her divorce. In 1917, while living in Tsarskoye Selo with the abdicated Tsar and his family, she reconnected with the man she'd known as a child, the son of the palace commandant, a man named Prince Sergei Putyatin. They were married that September. Together, they fled the Bolshevik Revolution with an old Swedish ID document of hers. Proving that necessity is the mother of invention, she hid the document in a bar of soap, then flashed it at the Ukrainian border to get them the hell out of Dodge. Later, in Paris, Maria opened a Russian embroidery shop called Kitmir to make ends meet. Who showed up to place an order but Coco Chanel? Maria's brother Dmitri was having an affair with her, but it wasn't total bliss. His Facebook status would have been set to, "It's complicated," because Chanel was also sleeping with the Duke of Westminster from Tiara story number 2 in this post. In any case, Maria had to sell some jewels to get the cash to hire enough staff to fill Chanel's order for embroidery. So Maria put out the word that she had Ella's emerald tiara and would part with it for the right price. Who was the lucky buyer? A king who needed to found a dynasty, Stat. This brings us to another Maria. This one was born a princess of Romania with the adorable nickname of Mignon. In 1922, she married King Alexandra of Yugoslavia, who gave her Ella's emerald tiara as a wedding present. In the original post, there's a picture of the two of them together, looking all young and adorable. He's on the thin side with short dark hair and glasses. He looks a little dorky, to be honest. She has short dark hair too and radiant skin, but in this picture, she looks a little shell-shocked. Why? Maybe it was wedding stress, or maybe she did a little homework on her husband's family. King Alexander's father had hired a terrorist group to murder the previous king and queen of Serbia. Dad and his goons dragged the royal couple out of their panic room, shot them, mutilated them, disemboweled them, and tossed the bodies off a second-floor balcony. Seriously, you guys, Balkan history has more violence, treachery, and murder than The Sopranos and Game of Thrones put together, I kid you not. Maybe that's why Maria looks a little zonked in the photo I described. So you may have noticed that I said Alexander's dad murdered the previous king of Serbia, but I described Alexander as the king of Yugoslavia. Well, Alexander had originally been the crown prince of Serbia, but in 1918, as part of the post-World War I dumpster fire cleanup process, Serbia was folded into a new country called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. otherwise known as Yugoslavia. Maria adapted well to life as a Balkan queen. Her skill set clearly included looking royal as as you can see in a picture in the original post where she's wearing this tiara and staring you down like she means business. But she also did things like paint and sculpt, along with charity work and the occasional PR interview with Western newspapers. In the meantime, her husband became kind of a dick. The country's elections? They were rigged. The Cyrillic alphabet? Nope, he didn't want to use that anymore. Alexander made changes that pissed a lot of people off. He gave zero fucks. He actually said, quote, "If you want to have serious riots in Yugoslavia or cause a regime change, you need to kill me. Shoot at me and be sure you have finished me off, because that's the only way to make changes in Yugoslavia." So that's exactly what they did. On October 9th, 1934, Alexander was visiting Marseille, France. A gunman fired 10 shots at his car, killing him instantly. Maria was now a widow, and her young son Peter was now the king. Maria hung around long enough to see him settled under the care of his regent, his father's cousin, Prince Paul. Then, in 1941, she ghosted. She said, "I'm going home to Missouri, where they never feed you snakes before ripping your heart out and lowering you into hot pits. This is not my idea of a swell time." Okay, just kidding. She totally didn't say that, but I couldn't resist the Indiana Jones reference. In any case, Maria moved to England and never returned to Yugoslavia. Her son, Peter, came of age in a time when rulers were forced to take sides for or against Hitler. When World War II broke out, his regent, Prince Paul, did his damnedest to keep Yugoslavia neutral. He knew the country couldn't hold out against either the Axis or the Allies. Neutrality was the only answer. But it just wasn't possible. Bowing to immense internal pressure from Serbia, the largest ethnic and territorial component of the country of Yugoslavia, Paul allied with Hitler. In retaliation, the British backed Peter in a coup and ousted Paul from power. "Oh hell no," said Germany. When the Third Reich attacked, Yugoslavia lasted all of a week. On his way to exile, Prince Paul totally facepalmed and was all, "God damn it, you guys, I told you that's what would happen." Peter fled the royal palace by climbing down a drainpipe and set up a government in exile in London. After the war, when communist forces took control of the country, Marshal Joseph Tito deposed Peter permanently. This poor guy had no crown, no country, and nowhere to go. But he still had his mother's tiara. In 1949, Peter moved to the United States and left the tiara with Van Cleef & Arpels in New York as collateral for a $20,000 loan. It's still there. They've since removed the cabochon emeralds and replaced them with paste stones. What did they do with the originals that had once belonged to Empress Maria Alexandrovna? Your guess is as good as mine. Peter died in 1970 in Denver, Colorado of cirrhosis of the liver. He was buried in Libertyville, Illinois, which is pretty ironic considering the story of his life. He was the only European monarch to ever be buried on American soil. In 2013, his body was repatriated to Belgrade at the request of his son. Phew, let's all take a breather after that story. This brings us to Kokoshnik Tiara number 5, Crown Princess Cecilie's Kokoshnik Tiara. Now here's an example of a Kokoshnik tiara that's filled in with diamond latticework anchored between the top and bottom of the frame. The top and bottom of the frame feature diamond laurel motifs, with smaller diamonds standing at attention, evenly spaced along the top of the frame. This tiara was most likely made by Fabergé. It's shown with the 3 detachable brooch-like elements that attach to the front for more visual interest. In the alternate configuration, sans elements, you could, say, apply a fabric backing to the latticework that matches your outfit. Crown Princess Cecilie of Prussia got the tiara as a wedding present when she married Kaiser Wilhelm II's oldest son, Crown Prince Wilhelm. Fabergé is a natural choice when you have as much Russian ancestry as Cecilie. Her mother was a Russian Grand Duchess, Anastasia Mikhailovna, as was her great-great-grandmother on her father's side, Grand Duchess Elena Pavlovna. In an age when the average woman was 5 feet, give or take, Cecilie was almost 6 feet tall. Combine that height with the shockingly thick head of hair, often styled in a Gibson girl pompadour, and it's no wonder German society fell for her. I mean, holy shit, you guys. Look at the pictures of her in the original post. Look at that hair. They don't make enough Aveda volumizing tonic in the world to get my hair to do that. Long story short, she was a fantastically beautiful fashion plate with an instinctive knack for PR who took German society by storm. Her sister-in-law, the Kaiser's only daughter, thought Cecilie was the bee's knees. If only her husband felt the same way. He first chatted her up at her brother's wedding in June of 1904. 3 short months later, they were engaged. They had a beautiful June wedding in 1905, and in 1906, their first son was born. But behind the scenes, their personalities clashed. Wilhelm was a controlling womanizer, but Cecilie wasn't the type to sit back and take it. If you believe the gossipy author Catherine Radziwill, Cecilie knew what she was in for. According to Radziwill, before the wedding, during a trip to Italy, Wilhelm kicked a dog on the street just to keep Cecilie from petting the dirty animal. Cecilie scooped up the dog, bought it from its owner, and ditched Wilhelm in the street. First of all, if this story's true, you go, girl. Also, we need to have a little talk about warning signs and which direction you should run when you see them. Another gossipy episode from Radziwill says that after their marriage, Wilhelm caught her reading a letter from a male friend and beat the shit out of her with a riding crop. Cecilie ran away, intending to leave him. She made it to the last train station on German soil before the Swiss border. Then the army caught up with her and brought her back to Wilhelm. Although they continued to pop out the kids, any romantic feeling between them was dead and gone. They had 6 kids total, including 1 baby girl with Down syndrome. The German Revolution in 1918 toppled the Hohenzollerns from their throne. Kaiser Wilhelm II fled to Holland, but Cecilie was allowed to stay in Germany with her kids, where she adapted to life as a private citizen. Her husband wasn't allowed back until 1923. Later, during World War II, her oldest son was killed in action in France. When 50,000 people showed up at his funeral, Hitler freaked the f*** out and banned all Hohenzollern princes from fighting at the front. Nobody puts Hitler in a corner, least of all a deposed dynasty no one was supposed to like anymore. Both Cecilie and Wilhelm survived the war, although they did have to flee from the Red Army in 1945. Wilhelm died in 1951. Cecilie died in 1954 and was buried next to Wilhelm in the cemetery at Schloss Hohenzollern. This tiara stayed in the family, at least through 1949. Cecilie's daughter, named Cecilie Victoria, wore it when she married one of the Monuments men, Clyde Harris of Amarillo, Texas, in 1949. You might be thinking, wait, what? The granddaughter of the Kaiser married an American and moved to Texas? Yes. Yes, she did, and it's a fantastic story. They met at Wolfsgarten, the Hesse family's hunting lodge. Cecilie Victoria and her mother had fled there from Potsdam to escape the approaching Soviet army in 1945. Clyde Harris was stationed there to catalog the castle's artwork and other valuables. Later, Harris investigated a jewel theft and helped the Hesse family recover a valuable Holbein painting. Cecilie Victoria had volunteered to help because A, she spoke perfect English, B, she was very familiar with the Hesse family history, and C, she knew a little something about royal jewels. They clicked right away, but it seemed like there were just too many obstacles for a romantic relationship. First off, Clyde didn't think he could ask a princess to marry him. Even worse, his parents were ticked that after all the blood and sweat and tears of World War II, he wanted to marry a German. So Clyde and Cecilie Victoria wrote to each other for 3 years, according to their daughter. In the meantime, he went back to Amarillo, Texas, and started an interior design business. At one point, both of them were engaged to other people, but when Clyde's fiancée broke it off, Cecilie Victoria was the one to comfort him. A few years later, Clyde went to Europe on a business trip. He contacted Cecilie Victoria, who met him at the train station. One look was all it took for them both to know. This was true love. They got married 10 days later. Let that be a lesson to all those bridezillas out there who stress over every detail about napkins and flowers and hair. A Hohenzollern princess born and raised in the lap of luxury, gave no f***, and arranged her wedding in 10 days. When you're in love, the details will all just fall into place. And if they don't, maybe those things don't matter very much after all. After the wedding, Cecilie Victoria told reporters she didn't mind giving up her title. "I've got a better title," she said. "It's Mrs. Harris." Say it with me now. Aww. She also said, "I'm going to be a real American, and I'm going to love Texas." Clyde and Cecilie Victoria had one daughter. I don't think anyone knows whether Cecilie Victoria inherited this tiara or whether she'd just borrowed it for her wedding. Maybe it actually stayed with one of her brothers in Germany. In any case, it was sold at auction in May of 2019. And since this is as close to a happily ever after as we're gonna get, I'm going to end this post here. If you're interested, you can get a clickable list of sources for this post on my website at girlandthetiara.com/blog. Thanks for listening to this epic post on Kokoshnik Tiaras. I hope you liked it. Until next time. Want even more royal history? Join my mailing list and get a free PDF with 4 tiara stories, plus Grand Duchess Louise of Baden's meatloaf recipe. I kid you not. It includes bacon if that helps. You can join now at girlandthetiara.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.